Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Nedarim Daf Mem Vav. Although we did see it, we're going to begin from the beginning of the parak, which is on Mem Ham and Beis. So the Mishnah said, "Hashutvin shenadru hana zemizeh." So in the event where you have both parties saying that they are not allowed to derive benefit from one another, so according to the Tanakama, asurun lechanes l'chatzer. They're not allowed to enter into the courtyard. However, Rabbi he says that since I'm really just using my property, then it's allowed. So of this, the Ran said it's totally on whether you hold yesh breira or ein breira. In other words, it's possible that we're dealing with a situation where the property or this courtyard is going to be entirely used by one person for a certain amount of time, and then entirely by the other person for a certain amount of time. Not that they're splitting it 50-50 in use at the same time. And therefore, if you hold yesh breira, then we say that it's understood that I'm using that which is mine, and therefore it's not a problem. If you hold ein breira, then we say that you can't do that, because really what you're supposed to do is you're splitting it completely in the middle, and therefore you're using that which is your friend's, and you made a neder against him. Now, this the Ran also points out, we're going to see this again in the Gemara, that perhaps the only time we establish this is only by chatzer she'en badin chaluka, which is the Gemara in Sukkah talks about. It was less than 4 by 8 amos. That if you would divide it in half, you'd have less than 4 by 4. 4 by 4 amos is the minimum for a dwelling. And so therefore it's like this. If it's so small, then perhaps we could say maybe yesh breira, and therefore there's the machlokas over there, because we can say it makes sense. It's so small, if you would split it down the middle, there's no way we would say, or it's logical to not say, that we both use it at the same time, because it's too small for both of us to use at the same time. It must be that if it doesn't have a din chalukah, one person uses it for a certain amount of time entirely, and therefore it's machlokas hold yesh breira and breira. However, if, as the Ran said, we're talking about a chatzer sheish ben in chalukah, let's say it's a very large courtyard, that in that situation we split it down the middle, it's shaykh that was the reasoning of how it was going to be divided among these partners, and therefore he says that hakol dibra koil aser, because everyone's going to say that in breira, and that we're going to assume that probably it was supposed to be divided in the middle because each are able to use it because it's so large. Okay, so that's what we discussed, and obviously much more in the Ran in yesterday's daf. So let's continue. Mem babonal u'shneim asurin l'hamid v'chayim v'tanu l'gadol tarnagoyim. Even though we have this machlokas Tanakama and Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, whether or not you can go into the property, whether you hold yesh breira or ein breira, they all agree that they're not allowed to go in to put up a mill or an oven or to raise chickens in this area. Why not? So the Ran says as follows: even though it says in the third parak in Baba Basra, Deshutvin ahamoda kidi lukapti, that just standing there, they're not makbid, and therefore l'chayra even doing these things shouldn't be a problem. Just putting these things in the courtyard. Mikomakam ikapti yochon l'akiv zelzeh. If in fact this one guy happens to be makbid, so you can stop him. So mikomakam ikapti yochon l'akav zelzeh. The avlopi should darken lavater vitor aser b'mudar hana. Even though normally, as we say, a person is pretty lenient when it comes to things like this, including drisas regel, like walking the property. Here, as we've paskin mentioned other mishnayos, that when it comes to Nedarim, we say no. A person is going to even have in mind when he makes a neder against vita, or even someone, let's say, walking in the property, or even hamada, putting these things there. Back in the Mishnah. Now imagine it's not both two-sided. Only one person makes the neder, saying that you can't go into my property. So similar to what we said before, the Tanakama holds that person cannot go in. Ani nechnas, I'm going to mine. Ve'eni nechnas shulcha, I'm not going into yours. Which again sounds like the concept of yesh brer, which we already established. And therefore the whole reason why we're saying this, as we'll see in the Ran, is because of the following line. The one who made the neder is going to be forced to have to sell his portion. So let's look in the Ran. We don't really need to mention this machlokas because we could have derived it from the Reish anyway. El mishum seifa nokta. He has to sell his portion. The davka kishin nader echad mehen. Only time you have to sell it is if only one person made the neder. Mishum dikivan ihu aser. Since it's aser to him, the chavri mutter, but this friend can go into the property because he only he made it aser for himself, but not for the other person. This other person can do whatever he wants. Maybe he'll get jealous, and he'll also use it. So he'll transgress and violate the neder when he made this neder to himself. Even though he put it upon himself, nonetheless a person can be jealous even though they really put themselves in that position. So this person doesn't stumble. We tell him to sell. But if let's say both of them made this iser against each other, the shneihem asurin lo yichashinan the chol chad v'chad mizdahir b'surei, because there's not going to be an element of jealousy because we're both in the same situation, and therefore we're not concerned about that. Skipping a few lines, even according to him, who says you can go into the courtyard, we're still going to ask him to sell it. Why? Because since you see your friend who's Mamad Rechaim or he has full ability to do everything, in which Rabbi Yaakov says he can't do. He can't put in a mill or an oven. And he can't do it. So also he's kane b'yavelasas kane. He's going to get jealous, and he'll end up also doing this. I can, according to the Rabbanan, who say you can't even walk in there. You could time it as shemis kane. You're going to get jealous because you can't even walk in there. The chaveru mutter, your friend can walk in there. Aval Rebbe Lezer ben Yaakov, my ichvaslei, but Drisas Regel, what's the problem? Yehunami Shari, he said you could walk in there. So if the whole issue is because he's putting these different things in the chutzner, but he could stop him anyway from putting the mill in there. So then what's the whole problem? So ikol meimer kivan de hashutvin ki haygavno kapte zila b'milsa. It would be degrading to actually stop him from putting in the mill, liikuva, and therefore for that reason he'll end up, even though he may want to, but it's going to be embarrassing, and then he'll be jealous because he's not going to tell him to stop, even though he technically could, and therefore because of that, the din is that he should sell it. Back in the Mishnah. So let's say you have someone from the shuk, not a partner, who makes a neder on one of these guys. So you can't go into the chatzar. I'm going to my friends. I'm not going to yours. Okay. So it's very similar. So in this, the Ran says, Mishum Tanakama Dulidei Pshita. According to me, it's obvious. Im al chavero yachol akev al echem and ashuk srichel meimar al shmi'in and Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. Right. That so according to him, it makes sense you don't go in. But the chiddush is Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov. Tanle dafil al echem and ashuk ein shutev yachol akev. Partners cannot hold him back. The davka kashu nichnas al tzarach hashutev. Aval lichanas al tzarach echem and ashuk atzma shul tzarach hashutev aser. And he says aval harizal kosted b'chol inyan shari. Nearly Devarov. Okay. Back in the Mishnah, Hamudar Hanam Chavero, and this is talking about again, they're not partners, and you make a neder against someone else. V'yeshlo merchatz, and there is a bathhouse, ubeis abad, or an olive press, and these things were muskarin be'ir. They were someone else is renting them out So the question is, can you use them? Because it belongs to this other guy, but it's being rented out to someone else, because now it's in someone else's domain. So if you have a tefisas yad, some control over it, we'll see what that means at the very end of today's daf, then aser. If that guy still has a tefisas yad on the thing, and we're going to see that he has he makes some money off of it, he gets a certain commission, a certain percentage, so then it's aser because it's still linked to that person. Which we'll just see the save of this mission, we're going to see it in tomorrow's daf. A person says to his friend, I'm making a neder only to your house, namely specifically to the present owner. We saw this before. Regarding your property, your field. So meis o shemachol acher mutter. If let's say it was sold to someone else, or the guy dies, then it's mutter because it was specific. He said leveischa. Koinim by zeh, but if he said this one shani nichnas sadazu shani lekech, he's really focusing not on the person but more on the object. So even meis o shemachol acher aser, it's still going to be aser. Fine. Let's look at question 9. The Gemara Mesavkale b'time the Rabbanan the Shutvin Shenidra Asurin Lechanes Dilma lo Deloy Kravina de Mishum de Ein Brerahu Mahu Hatam the Mesavkalon B'das Rabbanan Ma Nafkamina Ben Hatamim. Okay, let's see the Gemara first. Fact the Gemara. Iboilahu benadru pligi is the whole machlokus only when the neder was on himself. Hadiru zeh et zemai, and therefore the question is when a person makes a neder against each other, then what's the din? Mi amrin and benadrahu de pligi, that they only argue when you make a neder against yourself, because that's where the jealousy can creep in. For example, maybe in a situation where they made a neder against each other, then they'll say it's okay, yesh brera, and you can go in. Dachi anusin damu, because they didn't do it. It's like I didn't do it to myself. Someone else did this to me, so I'm an onus. And therefore, because of that, we can be more lenient. Odilma afil behadir zed zed pligi rabbanon. Maybe the rabbanon also argue, not just when you answer it against yourself, but you answer the other person, and the other person answers you. So is the din that the Rabbanan also hold in that situation, that you are not able to go in the field. So let's look at the Ran. Maybe everyone holds yesh breira. Umedina feel benidru shari, that really it is mutter to go into the chatzar. Of the Rabbanan savi kansinan hu. The Rabbanan say it's a kanas, and that's the reason that you can't go in. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov savar doli kansin, we don't kanas. Of a bahadiru, but if he made the other person forbidden, dolo shayach kanasa, you can't say it's a kanas because you're not answering yourself, you're answering the other person. So in that situation, it's not my fault this person answered me. Shari medina dish breira. So maybe then their attack is the din breira. So Tani back in the Gemara, nader mechaveroi hana. It says that a person makes a neder from his friend. Now, hachinami mistabra. It must be, again, this is mistabra, this is what it's talking about. Dikatani seifa v'koifenes and noidalim chaschelko. He has to sell his own portion. Now, iyamrit b'shlom did neder who, that he made himself usher, that he can't go into the courtyard. Hanudantani koifen. That's why we force it upon himself and we can ask him, because he brought it upon himself. El iyamrit de'adre, if let's say someone made a neder against him, right? So then amai koifenoso haminis onus. It's not my fault. It must be that not that you made it usher for me to go into the courtyard, but rather I made it usher for me to go into to your courtyard. And since I ushered myself, so therefore it's almost like a kanas that we say in that situation the din is that you have to sell it, which is mashma. If you would have ushered me, then maybe the din wouldn't be that. Omer Rabba, Omer Ziri. Okay, now let's see question 9. So he says it's a suffix. Dilma Sabri de Kansina no Shutvin, maybe we'll kanas the partners, Shinadru, that they made a neder, Shulu Yismahu Abreira, that we should not rely on Breira. Maybe everyone holds Yesh Breira. But maybe the question is, do we hold a kanas? V'nafkamina, De'ima Haitama Davka Nidro Aser Avo Hadir Zed Shari. The only time we're going to kanas is only in the situation where you made it aser against yourself. But if you would aser the other person, so that's like an oinus. That other person's not my fault that you made it aser to me. So therefore, we're not going. Maybe in that situation we will say yesh bera, and that other person will still be able to go into the courtyard. Okay, so that was the suffix of the Gemara, and the Gemara ended up using a raya that in fact this whole case is dafka in a situation where you aser yourself. That's why there's a kanas. Mashma, if you aser the other person, then the din would not be that. And the raya is that why would we force this guy to sell his portion, if the other person is the one that made the neder saying, I can't use the courtyard, I didn't do anything. It must be I asered myself, and therefore I caused my own problems, therefore we punish you, we force you to sell it. Omer Rabba Omer Z'iri, as we continue to, actually before we do that, let's look at question TA 22, I think. Ha'oiser peros b'koinim al atzma be'ez oifen aser b'chalipin? Certainly not. Okay. All right. So let's continue. So Omer Rabba Omer Z'iri machlokas. The whole machlokas in our Mishnah, as we saw this already in the Ran, is davka sheshba kedei chaluka. If it's a very large property, and therefore it's shaykh to say that ein breira, that each one is able to use half of the property separately. So therefore, if you would use the entire chutzner, so then you're using the other person's property. So therefore, that's when it's machlokas. Avol ein bo kedei chaluka, but if it's so small that certainly everyone would say divrei kol mutter, because it's clear that it's not big enough to be used, and therefore the person will be able to use it because they'll say yesh breira, today's my day that I can use the whole thing. Armali Rabbi Yosef harbeis achneses. How about when it comes to a shul? Actually, let's hold off for 1 second. Let's keep singing the Ran. There's not a lot of Gemara here, so let's see the Ran. So the Ran over here says, if a person has the full reign to be able to use whatever he wants, everyone will hold that you hold breira. It must have been understood that from the onset of the beginning of the partnership. It's not like a regular breira. So he said that there's a different level of breira, that even though we saw that elsewhere we may hold there's a chilk between deraisa and the rabbanan, that deraisa we hold ein breira, the rabbanan there is breira. So even though normally we say deraisa that we hold ein breira, but that may only be in a situation that we saw in the very bottom of the Ran on Mem Hamid Beis. It could be that there's an actual issue with the thing itself. However, in this situation, it's here the shutfin know that they own together. They just want to know at what time they can use it. So it's not the same level. So even though maybe we hold ein breira deraisa, maybe over here we hold yesh breira. I in that Ran again. So this Ran says, okay, fine, that's the end of that Ran. So on this, the Gemara says, 1 second. You're telling me that the whole machlokus is only in this situation where it's a very big property. If it's a small property, so then everyone will hold its mutter. Bahari beis achneses. When it comes to a shul, to kamish ein bo kedei chaluka dami. It's comparable to something which does not have a chaluka, because it's something in which it is not just for one person, and it's not divided among many people. Everyone can use it. Utanan shnei masurin b'davar shel oisa ir. We say actually over there that it's aser. El Omer Rav Yosef Omer Z'iri, we flip it. Machlokes she'ein bo dei chaluka. The whole machlokas is if it's too small. But if it is large, then we're going to say everyone will hold ein breira. The whole machlokas will hold yesh breira ein breira if it's really small. But if it's large, everyone will hold ein breira. Okay, let's look at TA 21. Hashutvin shenidra hanazeh mizeh im mutar lechanes lechatzer hamushutafais lahem. So be'ein ba de chaluk, if it's tiny, that's where we have the machlokas from Elazar ben Yaakov, the Rabban in our Mishnah. However, if it's big, has yesh de chaluka dibri hakol aser, which is similar to a Beis Achneses. Rav Hunam halacha kreb Elazar ben Yaakov, that you could walk in there, it's not a problem. V'chenim Rabbi Elazar halacha kreb Elazar ben Yaakov. Okay. All right. Let's look at this Ran. Ela Omer Rav Yosef Mizir Machlokas B'Shin Ba Din Chaluk. The Rabbanan Savri Afilu B'Chi Hagavna in Breira. Even when it is small, the Rabbanan will still hold in Breira, which is what we paskin like. In Breira is Deraisa. Rabbi Elazar Savri Kivanti Eav Shel Echem Ben Ashutel Achiv Eschavero Moishtamish Lo Oilam. You can't stop them from using the whole thing because it's so small. You can't just expect them to use a little bit of it. V'lo l'koyif l'achlek b'tchila. You can't split it. It's too tiny. Al manaskin kanua. It was purchased shtei gufa kanua l'gamri l'chol echel l'ashtimishu b'shas tashmishu. That it was supposed to be used entirely for you for a certain amount of time, and then for me entirely for another certain amount of time. And that's why he says that it's very clear that must be the case when it comes to ein bo din chaluka. Okay. However, if it has a din chaluka, if it's big, if you recall us in the Ran says the shema ha'echad yochai v'eschavero. One could press the friend. Hilkach v'Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov asurin. Okay. Fine. Weiter. So on this, the Gemara quotes the Mishnah. This is not a shutav, but you want to use the guy's bathhouse, and the question is that you made a neder against someone else, and then he lent out a bathhouse or an olive press. So it's all totally if this guy that is also to get hana from has a tfisas yad on the thing. How much control is that? So Omar Nachman l'mechsel shlish ravia, a half, a third, or a fourth. Basically what that means is that he has to have some type of ownership or a certain amount of monies coming in, some type of a commission. But if it's less, then not. So if it's less than a fourth, and let's say he's only getting 10% of that, that is an insignificant amount, and therefore you could still use it. He says, no, even something smaller, even babatzir is aser. Now, if you look in the Ran over here, babatzir, it doesn't say babatzir is aser. It says babeitzim, eggs. Darken haya shabal hamerchatz, the owner of the bathhouse, mistaker babeitzim, he rents it with eggs. Shahaboyim lirchot sham, that when he goes to bathe there, he takes eggs from him. He's not getting any benefit from it. Just the eggs, because it's not coming from the actual bathhouse, it's something disconnected from it. Okay, so it's an interesting lashon. Either it's bebatzir, which is less, or bebeitzim. Okay, behechidami deshari, and how? At what point is it mutter? So our answer is the mekabel betaska. If it's a flat rental fee, that you pay a set amount for the leasing, so it's not connected to any profits of the use of this item, and therefore it is mutter. See the Ran. We're going to stop there. She'enu noitel chelak hayadua berevach hamerchatz. He doesn't get a certain amount from the bathhouse. El shenaisen lo schar davar kotzuv l'shana. He pays a certain amount for the year. Rental fee. The chen gavna, or lease, is stalik alei bal hamerchatz memerchatzu legamri. Therefore, he has nothing else to do with it, and therefore you'd be able to use it at that point. Question 10. Amudar hadam mechaver v'yeshua merchatz musker be'ir eino lemem tvisas yad be'eza oifen lo yihav tvisas yad l'kuli alma be'eza oifen pligi b'gemar. So certainly, if it's Makabel Bataska, if it's a flat rental fee, that's a Dover Kotsuv, something set for the year, and there's no benefit, there's no profits coming from the use of the bathhouse, so it's mutter according to everyone. And if, let's say, it's the reward, here it says, V'aschar habam mechiras beitzim, b'merchatz, the reward for the selling of eggs, is where they argue, or batzer, less than a quarter. Okay. Let's see one last question, possibly. Question TB22. Right, so he said that he has to sell his portion. So Madur Belezman Yaakov Kaifino, so Limchar Belo Mutter Hulichanes. Doesn't make any sense. What's the problem? This is the Ran's question. Why would we say that he's, according to Rabbi Belezman Yaakov, why do we say that he's not allowed to go in there? Especially that he could, you could even force him in there. So you could say, I'm sorry, I don't want you to use these items. So what's the whole problem? So this is TB22. Let me mark this down here. TB22. So this is what I wrote. This is proof that the person made a neder on himself, and we knas the person for making this neder on himself, so he must sell it. Sounds pretty good. Let's see what the answer they're looking for. Shema yiskana, he may get upset, jealous. Bahamadas rechayim v'tanor, as we said, putting these things shechaveru mutter v'hu aser. V'ksivle milsel ake v'yavel le'mechshol. He's going to be embarrassed to say anything, and therefore he's going to end up being mechshol, and he'll end up using the chatzar, which is against his neder on himself. Ad kan.